Good evening. My name is Thurman Greco, and the name of this program is Let's Live with Thurman Greco. And we come to you from scenic downtown Woodstock, New York, and also from YouTube, Let's Live with Thurman Greco. And we've got one of our favorite guests this evening. And she's been slow to come because of scheduling issues. But that's okay. We've got her here this evening, so we're going to enjoy her for the whole hour. We've got Casie. And Casie has a very busy life and brought with her a pet, a beautiful German Shepherd. So we actually have two guests here this evening. But it's just really hard to get you in here, girl.
It is. It is. I would say mainly because I do a lot of dog sitting and pet sitting recently, which I'm trying to slow down on a little bit. There she is.
Well, you know, I have a couple of friends, have had a couple of friends who were pet sitters, and they worked in the day at a vet clinic. And then you talk to them and you find out, they haven't been home in weeks because they spend the night with the pet. You know, it's just like you live in the vet clinic in the daytime, and then you live in the pet's home the rest of the time.
Yeah.
So it's a nice life.
Yeah, it's not bad. Especially because, especially around here, everyone's home is so beautiful and everyone's property is so beautiful. So I do get to see some really, really nice places, and I get to work with just the best people and the best pets, and the people that I do pet sit for are just great people, and their animals are fantastic. So it's really nice to be able to work with them. But it does take up a lot of my time, and it does take up a lot of time away from my own pets. So I think I'm going to slow down on it a little bit.
How can you slow down? Summer's coming.
I know. Maybe just slow down a little until the springtime, just so
That's
I can.
just next week, girl. Why do we slow down?
Gosh, I hope so. Gosh, I'm so ready for spring.
Are you really?
I am. I am not a winter person. I'm a hiker. I don't like the winter. I really don't. I don't like being cold. I try to push myself to go out in the wintertime, but when my feet get cold, I'm done. I go.
It's all over.
It's over, and I just need better boots, I guess.
Well, now, how does that fit in with your developing career with wild animal rehab? How does that work in?
I get to, a lot of the places that I go hiking are kind of places where there aren't many people, but I do get to see a lot of people on the trails, and there are times that, somebody, just an example, recently, this past fall, I walked past a group of people that were on the side of a pretty common trail. I think it was in Tannersville. I forget what the trail is called. Group of people, some kids, and there was this one person that was saying, like, oh, get back, it's a cottonmouth. And they were talking about a snake. And I was like, I doubt that's a cottonmouth. So, because, I'm a firm believer of misinformation is dangerous, especially when it comes to animals. And, people already have a fear of snakes, which I understand because it's relatively natural for most mammals to have a fear of snakes. But there was a crowd of people standing around this animal who was obviously trying to cross the path. And, we do have cottonmouths here, but a lot of the time when people claim that something is a cottonmouth, I would say 99.9% of the time, it's a banded water snake. And they can flatten their heads out, and they flatten their bodies out, and they make themselves look like a venomous snake would. Because when you're looking for a venomous snake, you usually look for a spearhead-shaped head, because the sides kind of their cheeks, that's where their venom gland is. So they sort of need like a broader base at the end of their head. So banded water snakes have evolved to flatten their heads out when they sense danger, so that whatever predator might think that it is a cottonmouth, it's a venomous animal, stay away from it. And that happens a lot to people too. So I went over and I just looked at it and I was like, actually, this is a harmless banded water snake. And it looks like he's just trying to cross. So I think that if we just give him some space, I think he'll just cross the path and go along his way. So people kind of split. And I was like, of course, I mean, you can watch him like from afar, but give him some space. Like, he's a wild animal. He's scared. If they are, puffing up like that in that defensive posture, you see a snake in what they call the S position, where they're sort of coiled up like a spring ready to strike. The snake is not angry at you. He's not aggressive. He's terrified. And that's hard for people to grasp sometimes when something is ready to bite them, It's not trying to be mean to you. It's scared. So they moved aside, and lo and behold, the little snake went across the path and went into the water in the pond on the other side and swam away. And the kids were so excited about it. And, some of the parents were still like, ew. But, like, the kids loved it. And that's my favorite part, is when the kids kind of develop more of a respect for something than the adults do, because that gives me hope for the next generation.
Yes.
So yeah, it was just a little harmless snake that deserved to go where he needed to go.
So that was your adventure for the day.
That was my adventure for the day. But, just in general, hiking, I myself come across some things that I, may or may not be able to help. I enjoy foraging. I like to forage for mushrooms and wild grapes. And sometimes herbs. There's a lot of different edible things in our woods that you'd be surprised if you know where to look.
Do you look for mushrooms very often?
All the time.
All the time?
All the time. It's one of the main things that I do when I'm in the woods. I mainly take pictures of them. I have probably 2,000 pictures of mushrooms on my phone.
So you don't take them home and eat them?
Sometimes I do. It depends on the mushroom, but the vast majority of mushrooms are not edible. And even if they are, there are, for most mushrooms that are edible, they have a counterpart that looks like them that is not edible. And some of them are very tricky to tell which is which. Some of them you have to do what's called a spore print, where you put the underside of the cap on a piece of paper, either a black piece of paper or a white piece of paper, and you'll have you usually have a guide with you that tells you what color the spore print should be, and what if it'll show up on black paper as white, or if it'll show up on white paper as tan or black or red. So that's the only way that certain mushrooms are distinguished between the edible ones and the inedible ones that can really hurt you. But certain ones like chicken of the woods, like bear's tooth or lion's mane, like the puffball mushrooms. The puffball ones can be a little difficult too, because they start out their life very similarly to a very deadly mushroom called the destroying angel, as a matter of fact. It's a very common white mushroom that's tall. It has a big broad white cap, and it has like kind of a little skirt on the middle of the stem. And those mushrooms and the puffball mushrooms, which are edible, both start out their lives as a little white ball. And the only way to tell between a puffball and a destroying angel is to cut it in half, and the puffball mushroom will be completely white in the middle, and the destroying angel will have a grayish outline of a mushroom in the middle when you cut it in half from the top to the bottom. So But I've made full meals with mushrooms that I've collected from the woods, like chicken tenders from Chicken of the Woods. It's delicious. It's really good.
You know, there are a couple of people in Woodstock who hunt mushrooms and who sell them at the market.
Yeah, yes they do.
And it's always interesting to me. I haven't been to the farmers market in some years, but you have booths at the farmers market, and then you've got this guy that's got a box.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going
Yeah.
around from place to place, and this is what he was foraged for.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating.
It's great.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so fun. There's not much of a better feeling than when you can come home with a full bag or basket of food that you found in the woods. It just kind of, it brings you back to your roots. It makes you feel more in touch with like the world. Eating what is in the woods instead of something that's grown on a farm or something that's processed. It feels really good when you're able to do it correctly. But it's a huge learning curve, and it's relatively dangerous. So, if you're going to start doing it, make sure you have a good mentor. I happen to have a fantastic mentor that lives around here. And he took me out a couple of times, and I mean the amount of things that he taught me just within a summer was fantastic. Where to look for certain things, and everyone in the woods has seen mushrooms. Everyone sees mushrooms in their yard, but there are certain ones that really like to hide, or they like to grow super high up on a tree. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you've probably passed like hundreds of these if you're a hiker, and you would never know they were there. Like, just an example, a mushroom called a black trumpet, which is it's a black mushroom that grows about this tall. They kind of grow in groups, and they look like trumpets, like they look like the head of a trumpet, and they grow on things that are dark, and they're almost impossible to see, because they really blend into the moss and the dirt and whatever they choose to grow on. So if I don't think, before I started mentoring with him, I don't think I had ever actually seen one. But now that I've learned what to look for, I see them everywhere. So I've missed thousands of these in my life. I've walked past thousands of them in my hikes. I know it because now that I'm looking, they're everywhere. And it's just amazing. It's so fun.
So what are the times of the year? Or can you hunt mushrooms now?
I guess there are certain mushrooms that you can get now. I don't know what they are, but I did ask him about that, and he said that there are mushrooms that can be foraged now. I don't think they're growing now. I think they've already grown and kind of remain and can be foraged at this time. But mainly like the spring and early fall, but throughout the summer, I mean, you can always find mushrooms and things to eat in the woods, but the spring and the fall are probably like peak mushroom hunting season. And also other things like, in the spring you can find things like fiddleheads, which are just baby ferns. So ferns grow in a coil, like kind of circular, and when they're in that little kind of baby stage, they're very tender and delicious, and you can just pick them, and you can cook them like spinach or like green beans or asparagus in the same way, and they're delicious. They're so good and so tender and like leafy, and they're very, very delicious with some butter and garlic.
So when you go and you're foraging, I feel like that we are in some kind of special place here in the Hudson Valley.
Oh yeah.
Like if I were to go foraging, I have a daughter that lives in Arizona. The options are totally different.
Oh, absolutely.
you know.
Yeah.
And then also, I see a lot of mushrooms at the grocery store, and sometimes I wonder, well, how do they go, you know?
Those mushrooms are actually usually grown at somebody's house, and they're relatively easy to grow. The only issue, and really mainly the only reason that I don't grow them personally, is because most mushrooms need, believe it or not, somewhat of a sterile environment to grow in if you're going to grow them at home, because they usually grow in like a bag, like a kind of like a plastic bag, typically of rye, like rye seeds, and you disinfect it, and then you take a needle that has an inoculation of mushroom spores, and you inoculate the bag of rye. And then it'll grow out from the bag from little holes, and you'll have these huge mushrooms growing out of these bags, and it's beautiful. But I don't do it because I have a house full of animals, and I work with animals, and I keep my house very clean, but it's certainly not sterile, and I don't really have a space in my house that I can keep sterile, because my cat has full run of everything, of course. So I wouldn't be able to do that, because if with those little holes, if some kind of bacteria or mold, which is everywhere, gets into that bag, it'll mold. The whole bag will just grow mold instead of mushrooms, which is still a fungus, but that's not what you want,
Right. So you have to be very, very careful. So then when you go to the grocery store and you see these little lovelies, then they come from like a very special environment.
Yeah.
But then when you go out into the forest, you also have a very special environment.
Yes.
And so that's what makes mushrooms what they are.
Yeah. And the mushrooms in the woods just, they taste better. They're more earthy. They almost feel better to eat because they're part of the mycelium, the mycelium network that is underground. All earth everywhere has a network of mycelium, and it connects the trees together, it connects the plants together, and it's just a huge spiderweb network of fungus, and people can actually tap into this network and listen to it. And mushrooms, they learn that mushrooms actually sing, essentially. And trees talk to each other through this mycelium network. And that network is where all of these mushrooms come from. And it's not something that can be, corrupted like the rye bag that you would try to inoculate mushrooms with. So it feels better you feel more connected to the earth when you're able to forage things like that. It's different, and it's beautiful.
That must be so wonderful. How long have you been living in the Hudson Valley?
Well, I grew up near Albany, maybe an hour away from here. I lived in Albany until I was 18, and then I moved to Saratoga. So I don't really know how far.
So you are from here?
Originally, yeah. I'm pretty accustomed to the woods.
So how about the animal rescue? What's happening with the wildlife rescue? You were a first level. Are you still a first level?
Yep, I'm still a first level, mainly because I missed my one opportunity that I found to be able to get vaccinated for rabies. And I can't really find, there was like a clinic where you could get vaccinated for rabies, and I can't really find another way to do that. So that clinic is going to be happening again next year, so I'll get my vaccination for rabies, and I'll be able to move up to level 3.
Okay, so here you are a level 1,
Mm-hmm.
and you're waiting for the rabies vaccination.
Yes.
And how are you going to find out about the rabies vaccination?
The last time I found out about it, I got something from the DEC, and it was like a pamphlet for I think it was like a wildlife rehabilitator conference or something, and they were just offering the rabies vaccination there, and it's an annual thing, as far as I know. I'm pretty sure it's an annual thing.
And is the conference held in the same place every year?
I don't know the answer to that, but I would think so. I would think so. I think it's. I don't really know what it entails. I think it's just kind of all of the rehabbers in New York State kind of getting together and maybe listening to some workshops, maybe like, having some lessons, or, speaking, and learning and sharing experiences, and getting vaccinations, and having, sharing resources and things like that, which is kind of what I hope it is, but I really don't know.
So you're hoping to go if you can find out about it.
Mhm.
If you can get a couple of days off.
Yes, yeah, that's the part.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
Well, we can just all, hope springs eternal, girl.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, how is it working as a level 1 animal rehabilitator in the Hudson Valley in the Catskill Park?
It's good. I think that there's a lack of education, kind of in general in the area, because a lot of people aren't really from here. They're more from places that aren't so close to the wilderness. And I would say most of the calls that I get are on something that I can't help with, or something that I shouldn't help with. Just, as an example, something that I wanted to mention on this show today, I've received 4 calls over the summer and fall, and I'll just use one as an example, where a woman called me and said, "A hawk attacked a rabbit in my yard. I chased the hawk away, and now I have this injured rabbit. What do I do? Can you come pick up the rabbit?" And I said no. And the reason I said no is because she did not save the rabbit. She took a meal away from a natural predator. When you take food away from a natural predator and you try to save it, you're contributing to potentially that. That bottom line is that predator lost a meal. It's a native species. In that case, it was a red-tailed hawk, which is native here, and they're very, very common. But they're a huge factor in population control when it comes to rabbits. And there's certain years where rabbit populations are out of control. They're all over people's yards. They're all in people's gardens. They're really out of control, and the hawks help keep that in check. The foxes help keep that in check. The coyotes help keep that in check. And it's very, very important for them to stay healthy, alive, and being able to do what they do. There's a balance in nature that we should not interfere with. And I told her to put the rabbit back. She did not like that. And I get it. I understand. You have a hurt animal in your possession, and it's difficult to know that what you're doing might hurt that animal more, but that hawk might have had chicks to feed. That hawk might have not eaten in days. That could have been, you never know. That could have been the end of that hawk, worst case scenario. So I'm not sure what she did. I explained everything to her, and she was very kind about it. But I think she might have tried to call another rehabber, and I would hope that another rehabber would see the importance of allowing predators, natural native predators, to be able to, eat as well as any other animal deserves to do. Now, if that predator was a cat or a dog, that's a different story. I'd be there in a heartbeat. cats are not natural predators. Dogs are not natural predators. That is human driven. If an animal is hit by a car, that's human driven. You know, that I would help with in a heartbeat, because that's not natural. That shouldn't have happened. That wasn't part of the circle of life in this native area, in the ecosystem that has been developing here for eons. You know, cats are not part of that. Dogs are not part of that. Cars are not part of that, and people are not part of that. But when it comes to nature, you often just have to let nature take its course, even if it's hard. It's what's best for the ecosystem. And you know, there's always kind of branching off from this. There's a lot of hate for coyotes and foxes, because hunters don't like coyotes because they eat deer fawns, and farmers don't like foxes because they eat chickens and eggs. But you are putting chickens in front of if you don't want foxes to eat your chickens, make sure your chickens are safe. That's so important. Like, you can't harm a fox because it's doing what it's supposed to do. And hunters kind of willy-nilly shoot coyotes because they in their minds they're depleting the deer population, so they're taking deer away from the hunters, which is absurd because that's the coyote's job. It's not the hunter's job. That's what coyotes are here for. So instead of letting nature take its course and letting the coyotes control the deer population, that's what the hunters want to do. So they try to rid the ecosystem of coyotes so that they can take their place. But that's not all coyotes do. They eat rats, they eat squirrels, they eat chipmunks, they eat rabbits. And so deer are not the only population that they control. So it's so important that we have predators so that we don't get overrun by deer and rabbits and squirrels and rats, for that matter. And if that were to happen, if we were to wipe all the predators out, the deer and rabbits would starve. They would be competing so heavily for the resources that are available to them. There would be too many herbivores in one area deer, just like any herbivore, can clear a space of like plants and weeds within a day. If a herd of deer could clear an acre of plants and weeds that are edible to them in a day. They eat acorns, they clean up the forest, they help clean up the forest floor, which in turn helps stop forest fires. And it's a whole delicate balance that we really like to interject ourselves into. And it's hard to tell people not to do that because they really think that they're doing the right thing by saving that rabbit, and they're not.
Well, this is something that is a huge situation, and there's a lot of ignorance out there, especially with new residents who are not aware of the natural wildlife in the area where they have come. And so there's a lot of misinformation, but there's also just a vacuum. And when I speak to animal rehabilitators, very few of them step up to the plate and start talking. How do you get the information out?
This thing?
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm on every week, and I don't have a waiting list of wildlife rehabilitators.
Yeah.
So do you know why that is?
No.
I don't either. They must be overworked, or they're tired, or something.
Anyone in any animal industry is overworked, extremely overworked. There just aren't enough of us. And the main reason a lot of people, push their children and each other and themselves to find a job that's going to make them rich, that's going to give them a lot of money, and that's simply not the case in the animal industry world in general. It's you gotta love it. You really have to love it to do it, because there's no money in it. I don't get paid for any kind of rehabilitation. Obviously, I get paid at my job as well as my family owned clinic can pay me, and it's enough to live. But with the economy like it is, a lot of just a lot of vet techs and just people in rescue and dog trainers and all people who work with animals just in general, they're quitting, and they're getting desk jobs because it may not even be just that they want more money, it's that they need it. And living expenses nowadays are out of control, and it's very, very difficult to work in this industry sometimes. And we're losing a lot of people because of it, and the burnout rate is astronomical because there's just not enough of us, and it's you can't blame somebody for leaving their job because they're not treated right by the people that they work with, or work for, essentially, like pet owners, or people who want to adopt an animal, or people who want to save an animal, or sometimes they aren't nice, and it can really burn you out pretty quickly. So people are leaving in hordes, and I think that might be the reason. There's just not a lot of us anymore, and the ones that are here don't really have much time.
Right. I know that I went to the dogs for 10 years. I spent my 50s, the whole, 10 years with the animals. And I too worked in a veterinary clinic. And I was not a vet assistant, and I was not a vet tech. I did other things, and I wasn't the bookkeeper. So I did other things. But one of the things that I saw in this clinic, and I have to, because I saw this clinic, I have to extrapolate this and say it wasn't an exception. But the clinic, the vet was, he was good at what he did. And so he was very busy, and everyone kept busy. And most of the vet assistants and vet techs who worked there had master's degrees.
That's not the case anymore.
Well, but they didn't have master's degrees in veterinary medicine. They had master's degrees. They went into scientific things, and then once they got the degree, it was like, well, now what? And then they found out, okay, I can go work at the vet clinic. So they really were vet assistants or vet techs by accident. Not that they didn't like doing it. And of course, once you start working with the animals, it's a whole other thing. But it was like they had the advanced biology degrees, they had the advanced chemistry degrees, they had the advanced, and there just was not a call for that level of education in that community.
Sure, that makes sense.
So if you're going to continue to work, and if you're going to live in the community where you want to work, then you go down to the vet clinic and you fill out the application.
Yeah, that's funny because a woman I work with, I believe, has a biology degree or something like that. I think it's some sort of biology degree. But those degrees, like anything scientific, like chemistry, any kind of lab work, like biology in general, those are things that you will apply as a vet tech to your job. if you were trained and have education and working in labs and looking at petri dishes and looking in microscopes, you do that as a vet tech. So you can apply those skills as a vet tech. So that, I guess, that's a good place to start, because in a smaller sense, we do that. Every day I look at the microscope if I'm looking at either pee or some sort of aspiration from a tumor or blood, and you learn very quickly what you're looking at, and somebody who already has a lot of experience in what they might be looking at and what might be abnormal between two different cells, which is not something you really learn as a vet tech. That's something that you kind of have to learn along the way. But like, if you already know that, that's a great advantage. Somebody who's been a vet tech for 10 years might not know what an abnormal blood cell looks like, and so a vet tech looking at a slide of an aspiration from a tumor might see, oh, it looks like it's just a bunch of red blood cells, maybe a white blood cell here or there. While somebody who has a degree in organic chemistry could look at that slide and be like, oh, this is an abnormal cell right here. This could mean that we should send this out for a biopsy, and that could. I could see how that would be a great place to start for somebody who would have a degree in that area. But I don't know much about that field, so I don't know if they're hurting for people or why they might be coming to this field, but we need them,
Well, because the jobs are not here in Ulster County. Those kinds of jobs are not here.
Yeah, that's fair.
So if you're going to, and of course, people who are living in the Hudson Valley don't want to leave.
No, they don't. It's beautiful. It's
Yeah,
perfect here.
so
It's
why go
paradise.
somewhere else? So, you just go down and work with the vets. But I am intrigued by the wildlife rehabilitation. How do you get started? How do you even decide, gee, how am I going to do this?
Well, you need to do your own research, and a lot of it. And you could buy yourself textbooks. You could buy yourself encyclopedias. I would avoid Google, just in general, because when it comes to Google, if you can find one fact, you can find the opposite fact.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, it's mainly just doing your own work, putting your nose to the ground and learning about the animals in your area. What is native, what is not native, even the plants, because that's also important. Because when you're on a hike, you see a bunch of weeds that aren't native. Pull them up. I do it. And also learning about things like, how important predators are in the ecosystem, why you should not take an animal away from a predator, things like that. And some of these things that you have to take a test to be a wildlife rehabilitator anyway. And you need to get above, I think, an 85 on the test to be a rehabilitator. So you're going to have to study anyway. And there's a lot of really obscure questions on that test, like what's the best way to kill hookworms on a surface of like a counter surface, or what's the best way to kill coccidia in a cage? Like if an animal has coccidia and you're cleaning the cage, what's the best way to do that? How long are beavers with their mothers for? Really odd questions that you would never think to learn about unless you were to become a wildlife rehabilitator. And these things are kind of important, because if you are to just say rehabilitate a beaver, and because they're with their mothers for years.
Are they
And
really?
yeah, and they stay with them for years. And you know, if you did not know that, and you were to receive a young beaver, you would need to rehabilitate that beaver for years before returning it. Unless you were, nursing it back to health, and then you could, if within a certain amount of time, I'm sure you could potentially give it back to its mother if its mother was still in the wild, but there's always the chance that she will reject it at that point. So that's also a balance, whether or not you want to take that risk. But that kind of knowledge is important, and it's not something you would think of learning unless you were doing something like this.
So what you're saying is that being a wildlife rehabilitator takes a person who is 100% a self-starter
Yeah.
and an independent learner
Yes.
and an independent researcher.
Yeah. You could get like a.
So there are no wildlife rehabilitator
Degrees.
clubs in Woodstock.
Not that I know of. I mean, we all kind of know about each
do
other,
you
and
really?
yeah, and I've gotten calls from other rehabilitators that couldn't take like a squirrel or something. I've had two actually come into Woodstock and drop. One was a chipmunk and one was a squirrel off at me. Actually, three, and one was a rabbit. So if one, and I don't really do, I can, but I don't do birds. I don't have any flight cages, so I wouldn't. I just don't have the resources to be able to do birds appropriately. So I would send them to Ravensbeard if I got the chance to. So we do communicate with each other for the most part, and we also communicate with like vet clinics in the area. Obviously, Dr. Hand's clinic doesn't do wildlife, but Cornell does. So I have the phone number of one of the Cornell doctors, the wildlife doctor at Cornell, and I've called her very, very late at night before. Just kind of also, I guess that's another thing, is to have those resources and to learn who in the area is part of this, community, and establishing a rapport with them, asking questions, asking them what they do, what is the most important part of it, what kind of things do I need at home, like to help me out, like bandages, saline solution, certain cleaning supplies, cages, bedding, litter, pools, anything like that. What would I need to start and set myself up for success? And I would say one of the most important things is bite-proof gloves. Very important.
Wild animal gloves?
Yeah, yep. I have 2 pairs.
Well, I know that when I was working with dogs, I definitely had wild animal gloves as well. Mm-hmm. You have to when they're stressed. You have to, and anytime you're introducing yourself to another animal, whether it's wild or tame, I mean, that's part of it.
Yeah, and and stress. People also, for themselves, I don't think put enough thought into how much stress affects you and animals. Stress can kill a rabbit. Stress can kill a bird. Sometimes it's not worth it because of the stress that you're going to put the animal through. It can cause huge issues. Just like sometimes it's not worth bringing your cat to the vet because stressing them out will just make whatever problem they're having worse. And
so what do you do?
So just as an example, as a vet tech, if a cat has like a urinary issue, and so a lot of the questions, we'll have somebody call and say, my cat has started peeing outside of the litter box. My cat has started peeing on the couch. My cat has started peeing here and there. The first question we ask is, has anything in the cat's life changed recently? Anything at all? Did you move the litter box? Did you move her water dish? Did you introduce a new cat? Did you have a baby? Is somebody working on the house? Did a new person come into the house for a day? Did you have a party? Anything at all. And I would say 90% of the time they say, oh, well, actually, this happened. And in that case, that's usually cystitis. And if a cat doesn't have, other signs of like having any kind of infection or blockage, they're not straining. Other than that, keeping a stress-free environment for the cat, offering as much fluid as possible, adding fluid to the food, getting a pheromone treatment such as Feel Away that you can get at your local vet usually, adding that to the house as like a plug-in or a spray, or I think they even make collars. Like, start there, because if your cat is struggling with a urinary issue because of stress and you're bringing him to the vet, we're probably just going to send you home with anti-stress medication, the stress of the trip itself can seriously make it worse. And often when it comes to a male cat that's struggling with something like that, they could turn out that night having a blockage because they were so stressed out by the day that their urinary tract became so inflamed that it closed, that it blocked, or they had like a clot from all the inflammation that it's stuck in the urethra and now it's blocked. That happens more often than than you'd think. But sometimes you have to weigh like whether or not it's worth the stress of bringing your pet to the vet. Like a cut on like their paw, a lot of the times, like just keep an eye on it, things like that, because stress takes a huge toll on people and animals, and it takes a huge toll on their health. And the same thing with wild animals, except it's 100 times worse, because a wild animal, at least your pet cat is somewhat used to the carrier, somewhat used to human beings. A wild animal, you're taking it out of the woods and putting it into these sterile white walls with these big monsters that have front-facing eyes like predators do, and that's massively stressful. And just something like that can cause a rabbit or a bird to have a heart attack. And of course any animal is going to fight for its survival, and you're putting yourself at risk as well, because most of these animals bite, and they bite very, very hard. If it has a mouth, it bites. And people don't put a lot of weight onto how hard a squirrel can bite, and they bite very hard. So you're putting a lot at risk by putting these animals in stress. So you need to weigh whether or not it's worth it.
Well, so if you feel like that, if you have a pet that is stressed out, how do you get the medical care?
You can still, obviously, if they need medical care, you need to take them to the vet. You just have to weigh whether or not it's worth the stress. And you can always ask your vet if it's worth it. You can always ask the tech if it's worth it, Is it worth coming in? There are some dogs that love coming to the vet, come in for a cut, we'll take care of it. But there are some cats that love coming to the vet. But like for certain animals, they have to come in and be sedated. Like, is this something that we, could send you home with something? Is this something that you could try to manage at home? Is it worth it? Most of the time, if a person is calling us to come in, it's worth it, yeah, it is. But a lot of the time, people, if your dog just has like a little cut on his toe, like, and he's terrified of going in the car and terrified of going to the vet and needs to be sedated and, at the vet, then maybe it's not worth going for the sake of him and his stress levels.
And so when you get an animal from the wild, and that animal is going to be stressed. So if he's already injured or hungry or sick or whatever, and then you take this animal into your environment, it's going to be more difficult. So what you're saying is you are going to make the problem temporarily worse.
Yes. Yep.
So that's something that as an animal, as a wildlife rehabilitator, that's something that you take for granted. So whenever somebody calls you to take care of an animal, that's something that you have to factor in immediately.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as a person, if you're new to this area and you don't know that much, and you've got a wild animal that is stressed and in trouble, then that's something that you have to take into consideration as well. So what are some other things that we take into consideration when you get ready to call the wildlife rehabilitator?
What, I guess, you should consider what might have happened. Is this like something that is this safe? Like, as the person that's calling, like, make sure that you are safe, that you are away from the stressed animal, that you don't get bit yourself. You should, maybe, I'm not really sure what else, I guess just take into consideration if a person physically taking an animal out of the situation that it's in to put it into another temporarily, if that's needed, if that's necessary, like, just as an example, every wildlife rehabilitator every spring gets calls about deer, about fawns in their yard, about I haven't seen this fawn's mom in this long, and a lot of the times they will just pick the baby up and bring it inside and call, and most of us will tell you to put it back, and like there are certain things to look for. For example, like if the tips of the ears start curling back, that's a sure sign that it's malnourished and likely very dehydrated. It needs to see a wildlife rehabilitator immediately. Or if it has an obvious injury, something like that. But before you pick that fawn up, how long has it been there? Is it in danger? Like, do I have dogs that I need to let out that are going to encounter this fawn? Is there somewhere, if it is in danger because of my dogs or because of the road or whatever, is there somewhere that I can put this fawn that is safe, that the mother is still likely to find it? Have I seen the mother? I don't know if I mentioned how long has it been there, but things like that to take into consideration. Like, a nest of baby rabbits. Another one is a lot of the times people mowing the lawn will go right over a rabbit den, and a huge misconception that goes around and continues to go around, that I continue hearing, that is simply not true, is that if you touch a baby animal, the mother will reject it because of the human scent. That is not true. Maternal instincts are way stronger than that. Most maternal instincts. Obviously, there are here and there's a mother that will reject their baby. That's very, very rare in the wild, but it does happen. If you just pick those rabbits up, make sure that you get the whole nest, so there's going to be a lot of hair, because she'll pull her hair out and she'll make a nest of hair. You want to pick up those babies, and you're going to move them underneath the bush, or you can even dig like out a little hole put the babies in it, cover it with some grass clippings underneath a bush, something like that, somewhere near where the mother will be able to smell them. But it's really important to have her hair around it so that scent is really strong. But immediately picking those rabbits up and bringing them inside, I mean, the risk that you're putting those rabbits in is astronomical. And the main reason for that, the main reason that a lot of wildlife rehabilitators, many times including myself, will refuse to take in baby rabbits, cottontail rabbits I'm speaking of specifically, which is the rabbit breed, the rabbit species that we have in this area, is that baby cottontail rabbits during their weaning period go through a change in their gut flora that requires an extremely specific probiotic that really only the mother can make with her milk. It's a very specific probiotic that...
Oh my gosh, we're down here to 5 minutes. Okay.
So if you just finished. That's very hard to recreate artificially with milk and stuff. So, you can look online and it'll tell you, give them cat milk, give them the Espalac that you can buy at the store, which while that will keep them alive for a little while, and they'll look like they're doing great, and they will be doing great, that weaning period will come where that gut flora will change dramatically, and they need that specific mix of probiotics, which is, it's extremely difficult to recreate, and a lot, cottontail rabbits, I believe, have a 99% fatality rate being rehabilitated because of that reason. And they will do great until that moment. And it's so sad because you've worked weeks, days raising these rabbits. They're doing great. They're hopping around, and then they crash because you just don't have the right probiotics to support their gut flora. So very sad. Not a great note to end on.
That's so fascinating. I really, some of the things that you have said, some of the things that you take for granted are so fascinating. So I'm not going to ask you to tell people where they can reach you. I think you've reached that point.
People reach me. I'm on the DEC website. You can find my name on the DEC website. So
that's enough?
Yeah. Usually.
Okay. Well, we thank you very much for coming.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
And tell me about the puppy dog too now. We haven't discussed her at all.
Yeah, she's a rescue. She was going to be put to sleep, unfortunately, when she was 10 weeks old because she was born with a deformed leg. And I was working at the vet clinic in Florida, and I said, I'll take her. I'll save you the price of the euthanasia, and I'll take her off your hands. And so now she's my best friend, and she's 5 years old.
And she's beautiful.
And she is.
And I thank you so much for coming.
I'll be back.
Casie, you have been such a wonderful guest. And we'll try to come back in a couple of 3 months if your schedule allows.
Yeah.
So we can talk some more about wild animals and pet animals and all kinds of things. And mushrooms.
Maybe I'll bring some if it's springtime.
Wow. Well, January, February, March, April, May. Oh. Winter's going to be over.
Oh, I hope so. I'm so done.
Are you really?
I am. My kids.
Oh, it's only January.
I know. Don't say it. Don't say it's cold. It's okay. I'm keeping myself busy.
I think it's better here than Colorado, though, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Colorado's a very biting cold. It's very dry and biting.
Can I say goodnight?
Thank you. And thank you so much, Ellen. And thank you very much for coming.
Anytime.
And thank you for bringing your family members with you.
Of course.